Hi, this is the second part of class 24 if you're on the Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule, and this is the second part of class 17 if you're on Tuesday, Thursday schedule. So the first video we talked about how to record account receivables separately using sub-accounts and how to record credit card sales. This learning objective we're going to talk about direct write-off method of uncollectibles. So here's a sad fact. Not all the customers always pay. And so we have to do something about that, and we have to account for it. Because we know that, hey, if we sell stuff on credit, some small percentage, they're just not going to pay us. So we can't really claim that as an accounts receivable if we know they're not going to pay us. And once we know for sure who it is, we have to write that off. All right, so there's two methods for this, and we're going to talk about one today and another one on the next class. All right. Selling on account brings both a benefit and a cost. The benefit to a business is the potential increased revenues and profits by making sales to a wider range of customers. The cost, however, is that some customers do not pay, creating uncollectible receivables. Customers' accounts receivable that are uncollectible must be written off or removed from the books because the company does not expect to receive cash in the future. Instead, the company must record an expense associated with the cost of the uncollectible account. Bad debts expense is the cost to the seller of extending credit. It arises from the failure to collect from some credit customers. There are two methods of accounting for uncollectible receivables and recording the related bad debts expense: direct write-off method and allowance method. So bad debt expense, some people don't pay you back, so you have to, that's an expense. That makes sense, right? So we have to write it off, get it off our books, because otherwise, if you looked at our account receivable on the balance sheet, it would be overstated. Because if we know somebody's not going to pay us, we can't say, oh yeah, that's money we're going to get in the future. That would be lying. That would be fraudulent financial statements. So we don't want that. So we're going to write it off, charge it to bad debts. Two choices: direct write-off and allowance. So the rest of this tape will really be talking about direct write-off method. Next class, allowance method. The direct write-off method of accounting for uncollectible receivables is primarily used by small, non-public companies. Under the direct write-off method, accounts receivable are written off and bad debts expense is recorded when the business determines that it will never collect from a specific customer. Once an accounts receivable is written off, the company stops pursuing the collection. Some companies might turn over delinquent accounts receivable to an attorney or collection agency to recover some of the cash for the company, but generally, companies do not expect to receive any future payment. So small companies that don't maybe have a lot of receivables use this direct method. So when they know somebody's not going to pay them, like they've called them a bunch, hey, you owe me $250 for that purchase, and you call them and they don't. You finally come to a point like, well, I guess they're just not going to pay me. Then you go ahead and write it off. And so small businesses will do that because they don't have that many accounts, right? It's not material, it's not that big of a deal. So that's what we're talking about. Maybe you get a bankruptcy notice. It's like, oh my gosh, that customer's declaring bankruptcy. I guess they're not going to ever pay me now. So you write it off. That's what we're talking about. You know you're not going to get paid, you write it off. And this is the direct method for small companies. So here's an example. Dan King's subsidiary accounts receivable will be credited for $200 to remove the uncollectible account from the books. In addition, a corresponding $200 debit will be posted to the bad debt expense account. So here's an example. this guy's not going to pay us, Dan King. So we're just going to write it off. Okay, well, sorry, you know, don't shop here anymore, Dan. Your credit's not good with us, cash only. So we're going to write it off, so it's just an expense, which they're always debits, right? Expenses are always debits, so bad debt expense. Accounts receivable, which is an asset, which we're decreasing, so decrease asset with a credit. So there you go. Expense, debit, decrease asset, credit. You're done. You've written it off. That has gone away, right? We've written it off the books. It's off. That's what that means. Direct write-off. We've directly written it off. And you're done. That's not bad at all. Very doable. Now the only other thing you need to think about is, well, what if somebody pays you? This has happened. You know, people having a hard time and it gets, oh, I can't pay you, I can't pay you. It gets to be, 30, 60, 90 days late. And you can't keep it around on your books forever, so you go ahead and write it off. But then some people are decent people and they're going to pay their debts. It's like, well, I know I owed this to you and I know it's been 6 months, but here it is. Here's the money. And you're thinking, oh, that's great. I already wrote it off, but you don't tell them that. You just say, oh, thank you for the money. I appreciate your being decent about that. So here's an example. Sometimes they come in. So to account for this recovery, you reverse the write-off and then record the payment. So remember, we wrote it off, so there's not a receivable on the books anymore, right? So we have to put it back on the books before we can accept the cash. Well, you don't tell the customer that, you just take the money. But when you do the bookkeeping part, you put it back on the book. So here's how you put it back on, right? Even though customer accounts are sometimes written off, the customer may still feel an obligation to pay the amount owed if at some future date the customer is able to send in the original payment. The company reverses the earlier write-off. Then the company records the payment by debiting cash and crediting the customer accounts receivable. So just like any other payment, right? So the only thing is, you just put it back on the book. So here that guy came in and said, oh, here's the money. So you go, oh, great. So you put it back on, right? So if you notice, this is just the reverse of this, right? When we charged it off, we wrote bad debt expense, debit, accounts receivable, credit. So we flip that, put it back on the books. Accounts receivable, debit, bad debt expense, credit. Then we take the payment, just like we've already been taking payments all along. Cash, debit, accounts receivable, credit. And that's how you take care of direct write-offs. All right, that's it for this tape. Your next class is going to be the allowance method, which is what bigger companies use. So see you in a little while. We'll talk about the allowance method.